Hi, in this video we will take a look at the Object tab and the Data tab of the Properties panel in Blender. First up, the Object tab. The Object tab controls the settings for your currently selected 3D objects. There is another tab called the Data tab which also controls the settings for your currently selected 3D objects. So let's first look at the Object tab. Basically, if you select your 3D objects, I want to select, say for example, the icosphere. The transform tab allows you to control things like the location, rotation and scale. So I can move on the x-axis, I can move on the y-axis by clicking and left dragging. I can control the z-axis by left click dragging. Same goes for rotation. You can see it being affected in the 3D viewport. And the scale, so the x scale, the y scale, the z scale. Yeah, that's pretty much the transforms for the 3D objects. You can obviously do the same in 3D viewport, and you can also do the same in the properties panel, which is again why the properties panel is so powerful, because you can do pretty much everything here. Next we have transform locks. Basically this locks or prevents the user from carrying out specific operations such as the location, rotation and scale. So for example, if I lock, say, all of the scale, this does not work in the properties panel. You can still scale it from here and scale it any way you want from here, but you cannot scale it from 3D viewport. So by pressing S I'm trying to scale, or by even pressing here I'm scaling, it doesn't work unless you unlock it. Groups, as you know, you can group these objects with other 3D objects. This is great for organization, so if you have like trees and houses and roads and people, you can group them as such as create a group for all your tree objects, a group for all your house objects, a group for all your human objects and things like that. Display, this basically shows things about your 3D objects. So if I click name, you can see the name of your 3D object. If I click axis, you can see on what axis your 3D object is. If you click wire, you can see a wireframe of your 3D object, and things like that. You can customize. You can show just the wire itself, just a solid, a texture of your 3D object, which we have none at the moment, bounds of your 3D object, and if I get rid of wire, you just see just a square. Could be good for saving memory, because you don't have to show all your polygons. And yeah, duplication, this is a bit advanced, but simply speaking, you can sort of create or mimic crowds and things like that. A bit advanced to discuss in this one tutorial. Relations extras, you don't need to know about that. Motion paths, this is for animation when you want to see the path of your animation in action. Use that. Custom properties, again I don't care about that. Motion blur, if you want to enable motion blur just for this object, you select that. If you deselect that, there will be no motion blur for this one object. So by default it's ticked. Steps, if you increase this, the motion blur will look better, but also you'll use up more memory and the render times will be a lot higher. Cycle settings, again this is the same thing with the ray visibility. Should the camera affect this object? Should the diffuse affect this object? That is the material. That is, should light be allowed to bounce off this object? Glossy, transmission, volume, and shadow, and so on. And obviously, the name of your 3D object is here. So let's now move on to the Data tab. The Data tab, I'm not going to go into detail actually. The normals, vertex groups, shape keys, UV maps, and vertex colors. These are all very new concepts for the beginner, and I'm not going to go into detail as it requires separate tutorials on its own. But just know that this tab is used to do like more advanced and fancy things to your 3D objects. If you select specific objects such as a lamp, you will see a different type of settings for the lamp. So the Data tab becomes like a lamp settings tab. And you can control stuff like the strength of your light, the size of your light in this case, the maximum bounces, and the coloring that you want to use for your light. If you select the camera, the Data tab becomes the camera settings, and you can obviously play around with a lot of camera settings that if you're a videographer or a filmmaker, you might know all this stuff. So you can choose things like the focal length. You can also choose the look and feel of your camera, so such as the GoPro or the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K or the Ari Alexa, the Canon, you know, there's all types of cameras like the Red One 4K, or even the Samsung Galaxy S4. I mean, depends on what look that you want to give your final render. For my movies, I have used the Red One, or the Red Epic. It tends to look really good. You also have sensor, and you can also choose things like depth of field, the f-stop for your depth of field, the aperture settings. So if you're really good with a video camera or SLR cameras, then you can play around with the settings to, you know, give your final renders a really nice looking pop. And that pretty much concludes this video.